They say truth hides in plain sight, but they never tell you what happens when it finally looks back. It began with a dinner. Silver cutlery, laughter rehearsed 1,000 times. A family portrait framed in lies. But beneath the chandeliers, something ancient stirred. A silence so sharp it could cut through bloodlines. That night, a man smiled, the kind of smile that knows too much. How do you spend your $3,400,000 trust fund? 8 words, that's all it took to detonate an entire bloodline. What trust fund? And in that moment, everything shifted. The air, the eyes, the hierarchy. The power that built empires on obedience had just fractured. You could feel it, like static behind your skull. The sound of control unraveling. See, every family has a story they don't tell. But this one wasn't just about money. Owning the system, a system older than her, older than him. One built on a quiet rule embedded deep in the human psyche. Control is most effective when it feels like care. As she breathed in the cold silence of that private room, her world began to tilt. This wasn't about funds. It wasn't even about theft. It was about something darker. Who had decided she didn't deserve to know her own worth? And why? You feel it too, don't you? That tug behind the story. The echo under the floorboards. The sense that this happens more than people admit. That maybe someone once hid your worth too. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. The city outside her window moved in slow motion. Cars sliding through fog, streetlights pulsing like heartbeat monitors. The world was the same, but her perception had shifted. Once you see the gears, you can't pretend it's just a clock. Her mind replayed the dinner again and again, every detail reframed. The smiles weren't affection, they were containment. The compliments weren't love, they were leashes. Every "we're so proud of you" had been another layer of the cage. She could see the pattern now, praise when she obeyed, silence when she questioned. Years of conditioning disguised as care. That's how power survives, not by screaming orders but by teaching you which questions are too dangerous to ask. She remembered being 10 years old, tracing the veins on her father's hand as he told her never to talk about money. It's vulgar, he'd said. People who talk about money don't have it. The phrase had branded itself into her brain. Now she realized it wasn't a lesson in manners. It was a firewall, a way to keep the vault sealed. Outside her apartment, the city hummed. Machines, footsteps, anonymous lives overlapping. But under that hum she felt another rhythm. Something old, something she couldn't name yet. It wasn't about dollars or inheritance. It was about control embedded into generations like code. Control that starts in families and spreads outward. Into schools, offices, governments. Control that teaches people to police themselves so no one else has to. She thought of her mother's voice on the phone, soft and distant. "You'll figure it out, honey." Always the same phrase, always the same distance. And she saw it now for what it was, emotional choreography, a way to keep her dancing just out of reach, desperate for approval she'd never receive. That's when it hit her. The money wasn't gone, it had been converted. Into influence, into image, into the illusion of a perfect family that fed on silence. Her silence. She pressed her palms against the cold window glass and whispered to the reflection, "No more silence." The city lights flickered against her skin like static. Somewhere deep inside, something uncoiled, small at first, then undeniable. It was the first moment she stopped asking why they did it, and started asking what else they taught her not to see. When morning came, the light felt wrong. Too bright, too clean, like a truth that shouldn't be exposed to daylight. Evelyn sat at the edge of her bed, the trust documents spread across the floor. The numbers blurred into symbols. Names, dates, signatures. But beneath them she could sense something older than paperwork, an agreement written in the marrow of her family. Every dynasty has its scripture. Hers was simple, obey and inherit, question and vanish. For years she'd believed the currency of her family was wealth. Now she understood, it was obedience. The money had only ever been the mechanism, a leash disguised as privilege, a test of whether she could be molded into another keeper of the lie. But the test had failed. She began to look through everything she owned, old letters, photo albums, birthday cards. Every smile suddenly felt like evidence. The messages between the lines were clearer now. Stay grateful, don't confront, don't think too loudly. You felt it too, haven't you? That subtle pressure to shrink, to play the role you were assigned, the way certain people make you doubt your instincts because it serves their comfort. It starts in a family, but it never ends there. That's how entire civilizations are trained to sleep. Evelyn opened her laptop and began tracing the financial trails. Each click peeled another layer of illusion. Offshore accounts, shell companies, properties she'd never heard of. Her family had turned morality into a market. Even kindness had receipts. The deeper she looked, the clearer the pattern became. The system didn't collapse when people lied. It thrived on it. The world rewarded the same behaviors her parents had perfected. Control through charm, deceit masked as generosity, image over integrity. That's when the whisper returned, the one she'd felt at dinner, just under her heartbeat. It wasn't fear anymore. It was direction. She realized she wasn't meant to run from the system. She was meant to understand, dismantle it from the inside. In that quiet room surrounded by proof and betrayal, she finally smiled. Not with joy, with recognition. Because the first rule of reclaiming power is this: you cannot fight what you refuse to see. And for the first time, Evelyn was truly looking. Evelyn called her grandfather the next morning. His voice came through the receiver like gravel over glass. Slow, patient, tired. "You've been reading," he said. "I wanted to understand," she replied. "Good," he murmured. "Understanding is the beginning. But remember, truth doesn't absolve anyone, it exposes them." When she arrived at his office, the air felt older than the furniture. Books lined the walls, volumes on finance, philosophy, warfare. He motioned to a chair. "Sit." For a long time neither spoke. The city shimmered below, detached and unreal. "I built this family," he said finally. "But I didn't build it clean. Power never is. Your parents only learned what I taught them, to hide weakness, to trade love for leverage." Evelyn listened, heart hammering. "So this was your design?" He looked up, eyes pale as fog. "All control begins as protection, until it forgets what it's protecting." She wanted to hate him, but there was something magnetic about his honesty, like a confession carved out of stone. "You wanted obedience," she said. "No," he answered. "I wanted legacy. But legacy feeds on obedience the way a fire feeds on air." He told her how it had started. The first fortune made in a war contract, the first bribe masked as charity, the first secret account to ensure the family would always stand above the fall. "Each generation calls it duty," he said. "By the time it reaches you, it looks like love." Evelyn felt the weight of it settling over her, the invisible inheritance no one could spend or escape. "Then what do I do with it?" she asked. His smile was thin. "You learn to see the pattern without becoming it." He reached into a drawer and slid a small notebook across the desk. Its cover was worn, initials embossed in gold, R.H. "My ledger," he said. "Every deal, every debt, every compromise. Burn it or build from it, but choose knowing that whatever you do, it becomes you." Evelyn touched the cover, the leather cold. For the first time she saw her grandfather not as a guardian, not as a monster, but as a man caught in his own machinery. When she left the office, the wind outside cut clean through her coat. She looked at the city lights and realized inheritance isn't money or property. It's the pattern of who holds power, and who finally decides to stop repeating it. That night, Evelyn laid the notebook on her desk and stared at it for a long time. She didn't open it right away. Sometimes the act of not knowing still feels safer than seeing. The paper smelled of age and dust, the scent of things that have outlived their owners. When she finally turned the first page, she saw more than numbers. It was a map written in transactions, alliances, and secrets. A genealogy of decision. Disguised as business. Every entry had 2 columns, what was gained and what was lost. She read until sunrise. A contract in her grandfather's name tied to an education fund that never existed. A donation to a politician's campaign followed by a law change that doubled their holdings. Every gain was built on someone else's silence. Every loss, a lesson in what happened to those who spoke. It was no longer a family story, it was an anatomy of how the world sustains itself. The same patterns repeated: charm, transaction, erasure. A system not of villains, but of people too afraid to lose comfort to tell the truth. Evelyn began tracing connections outward. Shell companies merging into corporations, corporations funding foundations, foundations shaping narratives that defined right and wrong. The faces changed, the methods evolved, but the structure stayed the same, power feeding itself through generations of willing hands. She realized her grandfather hadn't left her a confession. He'd left her a mirror, and mirrors, when held steady long enough, stop reflecting and start revealing. She thought of the people she'd grown up around, their effortless charm, their curated empathy, the way they smiled when others failed, as though misfortune were proof of destiny. They weren't cruel, they were convinced, conditioned to believe they were preserving stability when they were only preserving themselves. That was the moment Evelyn's fear changed shape. It wasn't fear of them anymore, it was fear of becoming them, of inheriting their habits, their subtle blindness. So she began rewriting the ledger, not erasing, not burning, writing over it, notes in the margins, questions beside the deals, connections between the silences, turning the record of control into a blueprint for awareness. Outside, the city exhaled. Somewhere, new deals were being made, new lies written into polite language. But Evelyn had learned the quiet truth. You don't destroy a system by attacking it, you dissolve it by refusing to repeat it. She closed the notebook. The sun touched the edge of her window, pale and gold. Her story was no longer about revenge. It was about reclamation. For weeks, Evelyn vanished from the dinners, the calls, the polite invitations. People whispered that she was taking time. In a way, she was. Time to rebuild the architecture of herself. She studied what her grandfather had left her, but no longer as a student of the old world. She was designing something new from the fragments. A foundation that looked ordinary on paper, scholarships, microloans, quiet investments in small communities. But underneath, every decision reversed the flow of power. Resources moving from the top downward instead of up. It started small. A transfer to an overlooked school. A company bought only to be given to its workers. A family debt quietly erased. No one saw the pattern at first. That was the point. Revolutions that survive are the ones that never announce themselves. In the background, she kept meeting her grandfather. Each conversation shorter, gentler. He could see what she was doing, but he didn't stop her. "You're still using the same tools," he said once. "The tools aren't evil," she replied. "Only the intentions that wield them." He nodded. "Then make sure you remember the cost. Every act of change burned something." And she did burn. Sleep, comfort, the illusion of innocence. But in their place grew something cleaner. She began to feel her life align with a quieter kind of truth. Power, used consciously, stops being control. It becomes stewardship. By the end of the year, the family's name still stood on the same buildings, but the current had shifted. Money that once served image now served purpose. Influence that once silenced began funding voices long ignored. Her parents didn't understand it. The world barely noticed. That was fine. True correction doesn't need applause. One evening, standing on the same balcony where her grandfather had taught her about legacy, she looked down at the city lights and finally understood what he'd meant. Legacy isn't what you keep. It's what you release. She didn't speak the words aloud. She simply let them settle in the air, like a final signature on the end of a long, crooked contract, rewritten in her own hand. When the call came, Evelyn already knew. Her grandfather's voice had been fading for months, his sentences trailing off mid-thought as if the words themselves were dissolving. He died quietly, the way he had lived after she began to change things, watchful, still, letting her finish what he had started badly. At the memorial, there were speeches about his brilliance, his unshakable vision, his empire. No one mentioned the fear or the silence or the ledger. But as the crowd thinned, Evelyn stayed behind. She placed a single sheet of paper on his casket, one page from the new ledger written in her hand. It read, "We broke the pattern." She didn't mean they had destroyed the past, that's impossible. But she had stopped it from repeating untouched. That, she realized, was all any generation could really do. Interrupt the loop. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like slow applause. For the first time, she felt no need to prove anything, to her family, to the world, even to herself. The need for control had finally run out of oxygen. She returned home, opened her window, and laid the ledger on her desk one last time. The margins were full. Notes, questions, arrows connecting cause and effect. The handwriting at the end was steadier, freer. She picked up a pen and wrote the final line. Some inherit power, some inherit pain. The lucky ones learn to turn both into wisdom. Then she closed the book. Not in anger, not in grief, just closure. The kind that hums quietly when a long story has found its ending. Outside, the city kept pulsing, unaware. But somewhere beneath its noise, a new rhythm had begun. Soft, deliberate, unrepeatable. And that, perhaps, is how every story of revenge truly ends. Not with destruction, but with understanding.